Welcome to the Journal. Our subject in this hour is one you don't hear discussed very often in politics or around the dining table. It's buried so deeply in the American psyche that rarely does anyone bring it front and center. Our silence on it is one reason we have so much difficulty coming to terms with race in America. I'm reluctant to raise it even now because it's anything but a comfortable subject for television. But I went online not long ago and listened to a speech at Harvard University that I simply can't forget. And I wanted you to meet the man who delivered it.
Blacks and whites and other Americans who want to understand the meaning of the American experience need to remember lynching.
His name is James Cone, and he has a powerful message about seeing America through the experience of the cross and the lynching tree.
Out of the cross, the central symbol of the Christian faith, and the lynching tree.
That's right, the cross on which Christians believe Jesus Christ was crucified in the Roman Empire, and the lynching tree that meant agony and death for thousands of black people. Their connection is the subject of our broadcast. Be forewarned, you will see some disturbing images.
Yes, that is a noose.
In the past few months, we've all seen these chilling reports.
And just yesterday in Roosevelt, those two discovered by town.
Nooses tied to a schoolyard tree in Jena, Louisiana.
Historically reserved for white students.
Nooses left for a black member of the U.S. Coast Guard. A noose on the door of a university professor's office here in New York City.
Door at Columbia University.
Because today it's a noose, and tomorrow they're trying to put somebody's head in it.
The reappearance of nooses is a haunting reminder of the dark side of American history, when, after the Civil War, black Americans were forced to live in the shadow of the lynching tree. Thousands of human beings tortured and hanged by the neck until dead.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze.
Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Billie Holiday singing her signature song.
James Cone knows that song well.
That means that the trouble doesn't.
As one of America's pioneers of black theology, he's never been able to forget its message, and he wants his students at Union Theological Seminary here in New York City to remember it too.
So that the brutal facts of history keeps that hope from being just a kind of pie in the sky thing.
James Cone has been at Union Seminary since 1969, teaching systematic theology through the black experience in America.
It seemed to me that Martin and Malcolm represented two poles of my identity.
He grew up in rural Arkansas and soon found his calling in the church. He was ordained by the African Methodist Episcopal Church and went on to the life of teacher and scholar. Among his many books and articles are these: Martin and Malcolm and America, Black Theology and Black Power, and God of the Oppressed, all translated in 9 languages.
Not many black theologians and preachers have made an explicit connection.
Right now, he's thinking through how the cross and the lynching tree enable us to interpret America today.
So I want to start a conversation about the cross and the lynching tree, and thereby break our silence on race and Christianity in American history.
And Dr. James Cone is with me now. Welcome to the Journal. Glad to have you.
Thank you, and glad to be here.
That old Billie Holiday number that we played, Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black body swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree. I mean, nobody sings that anymore. You don't hear it, but yet that is deep in our DNA, is it not?
Yes, it's deep because lynching is so deep. And that song is about lynching. It's about black bodies hanging on trees. And that's deep in the American experience, particularly after the Civil War. But it's connected with slavery, too, although lynching didn't take place in slavery because black people were worth too much.
I didn't know that.
So they didn't lynch them during the time of slavery. It's after slavery. And it's in order to control the community. It's to put fear and terror in their hearts so that they will be forced to obey and stay in the fields and work and not louder, and to remember that whites control the world. Even though the South lost the war, they are still in control of their section of America.
After the Civil War.
After the Civil War. That's when the lynching started. They wanted to remind black people that they were in charge and that whites control, for the same reason why Romans crucified people in the first century.
It worked, didn't it?
Yes, it worked.
It worked.
It worked to a certain degree. It only worked in the sense that it reminded black people and white people that whites actually had political and social control and economic control, but they didn't have control of their humanity. See, that's what religion is about. Religion is a search for meaning when you don't have it in this world. So while they might have controlled the black people physically and politically and economically, they did not control their spirit. That's why the black churches are very powerful forces in the African American community, and always has been, because religion has been that one place where you have an imagination that no one can control. And so as long as you know that you are a human being and nobody can take that away from you, then God is that reality in your life that enables you to know that.
And even though you're living under the shadow of the lynching tree.
Even though you're living under the shadow of the lynching tree. Because religion is a spirit that is not defined by what people can do to your body. They can kill your body, but they can't kill your soul. We were always told that. There is a spirit deep in you that nobody can take away from you because it's a creation that God gave to you. Now, if you know you have a humanity that nobody can take away from you, they may lock you up, they may lynch you, but they don't win.
When you were growing up in that part of the world, we grew up only about 100 miles or so apart. I grew up in East Texas, you in southwestern Arkansas. I'm a little older than you, but we come out of that same culture. Did you, in your community, Fordyce and Bearden, talk about lynching very much?
Yes, my mother and father did. My mother and father did. We didn't talk so much about it publicly, but my mother and father talked about it all the time. They told us stories about lynching. I think that happened with many black families, is that we didn't talk about it much publicly, like in schools and in churches, but we did talk about it at home.
In the white community of my deeply segregated hometown, I honestly don't remember our talking about it. But when my father died, I found in his effects a yellow newspaper from Paris, Texas, where he was born and lived, and I lived there for a little while. And it was a lynching, a photograph of a lynching near his farm. 5,000 people had come to watch this man lynched.
Yeah. The spectacle lynchings were especially prominent just after the Civil War and in the beginning of the 20th century, spectacle lynchings. And they didn't stop until the 1930s, late 1930s.
How do you explain the current spate of the appearance of the noose again? Up comes this story right here from the suburbs of New York, a noose found in the basement locker room of the village police department. Mm-hmm. The deputy chief of police is black. Then you've got Jenna, and you've got what happened up at Columbia near your office. Mm-hmm. You think these people, they understand what that's the symbol of what actually happened to human beings when that noose was placed around their neck? Or is this just some kind of grim game?
Well, you don't have to know all about the Nazi Holocaust to understand what a swastika is. Hmm. You don't have to understand all about the history of lynching to know what a noose is. Everybody knows that. Somehow, you don't have to know that history. It's in American culture. As you say, it's in the DNA. It's white America's original sin. And it's deep. Like for a long time, we didn't want to talk about slavery. They didn't like to talk about 246 years of it. Then 100 years of legal segregation and lynching. Now, you don't get away from that by not talking about it. That's too deep. Germany is not going to get away from the Holocaust by not talking about it. It's too deep. So America must face up that we are one community. If anybody in this society, if anybody is brother and sister to the other, it's black people and white people. Because there is a tussle there that you cannot get out of. It is deeply ingrained in our relationship to each other in a way that's not with anybody else in this land.
What do you mean?
Because 246 years of slavery, number one. We have built this country. White people know that. Then after slavery, segregation, and lynching, we still have built this country. So it's a history of violence, a history of black people fighting in every American war, even the Civil War.
Like the Jews and the Arabs, right?
That's right.
They come out of the same...
Out of the same matrix.
Yeah. And they can't let each other go.
You can't let each other go. I don't care what you do. That's why those nooses create that kind of response.
But why don't we talk about particularly lynching?
It's ugly. Yeah. It's ugly. Black bodies hanging on trees. That's ugly. And Billie Holiday can make you feel that like you're at the foot of that tree. So it's ugly. People don't like to talk about stuff that's really deep and ugly.
You quote James Allen, who wrote a book in which he talked about the terrible beauty of the lynching tree. But beauty and terror seem so at odds with each other.
Well, that's my phrase, not his. That's my phrase.
Is that your phrase?
That's my phrase, but it comes from Reinhold Niebuhr.
The theologian.
The theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr.
You teach Niebuhr today, right?
That's right. Yes.
I think for Niebuhr, that it is the individual that ramps up to the larger group, that ramps up to the larger nations. And then when you consider that level of self-interest and pride.
Reinhold Niebuhr was America's most influential Protestant theologian of the 20th century.
So you think Niebuhr's right?
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right.
He taught here at Union Seminary for 32 years.
What was happening in the world when he wrote it? World War II was going on.
His analysis of how faith connected to power shaped 2 generations of political thought and influenced Christian leaders such as Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther King Jr. James Cone's class on Niebuhr is one of the most popular at Union Seminary.
What's at stake for Niebuhr is an ethic that empowers people to fight in the world. That's what's at stake for him.
Do you think there's any nucleus of his teachings that are still relevant in this new world that we're living in the 21st century?
Oh, without question.
What?
It's Niebuhr's perspective on humanity. Niebuhr has a profound understanding of the human being, which sees the human being as a creature, as finite, but also free. That is also with a sense of transcendence, but it's that freedom.
Sinful beings seeking justice.
Yes, it's sinful beings seeking justice. It's that freedom that also makes him anxious and also makes him always have good and bad, always mixed up together. It is never clean. And if America could understand itself as not being innocent, it might be able to play a more creative role in the world today. And Niebuhr could help America see that. And if Bush would read more of Niebuhr, he might be able to get a perspective on himself and on America that would deepen its vision about our world of freedom and justice.
If the president asked you for one book of Niebuhr's, to recommend one book of Reinhold Niebuhr's, which would it be?
The Irony of American History. That would be the book.
And the core of it is?
The core of it is helping America get over its innocence. Helping America to see itself through the eyes of people from the bottom. And you see, America likes to think of itself as innocent. And we are not. No human being is innocent. And so that would be the book I would recommend him to read. But since he's a Christian, I would especially recommend that he reads Beyond Tragedy. Niebuhr tells us that Christianity takes us through tragedy to beyond tragedy by way of the cross to victory in the cross.
Meaning?
Meaning that the cross is victory out of defeat.
And the lynching tree?
And the lynching tree is transcendence of defeat. And that's why the cross and the lynching tree belong together. That's why I have to talk about the lynching tree. Because Christians can't understand what's going on at the cross until they see it through the image of a lynching tree with black bodies hanging there.
Why?
Because what the Christian gospel is a transvaluation of value, something you cannot anticipate in this world, in this history, but it empowers the powerless. What do you mean by power in the powerless? That's what God is. Power in the powerless.
But the victims of lynching are dead.
No. Their mothers and fathers aren't dead. Their brothers and sisters aren't dead. I'm alive. I have to give voice to those who did die. And all of us do. That's why we can't forget it.
But you know, Dr. Combe, I went online and watched the video version of your speech at Harvard where you talked on strange fruit, the cross and the lynching tree. I must say that audience didn't seem very comfortable with that linkage, right?
No, they did not. No, because I said a divinity school, and that's mostly whites there. Blacks felt comfortable with it. They like that. They like that connection because it gives them a perspective on the lynching that empowers them rather than silences them.
People who have never been lynched by another group usually find it difficult to understand why it is blacks want whites to remember lynching atrocities. Why bring that up, they ask? Isn't that best forgotten? And I say absolutely not. The lynching tree is a metaphor for race in America, a symbol of America's crucifixion of black people.
See, whites feel a little uncomfortable because they are a part of the history of the people who did the lynching. I would much rather be a part of the history of the lynch victim than a part of the history of the one who did it. And that's the kind of transcendent perspective that empowers people to resist. That's why King knew he was going to win even when he lost by human standard.
You think that's what he meant when he said, I see
the promised land?
The promised land.
Yes.
I'm going to the mountain.
Yes.
He said in Memphis, that last beat.
That's right.
Yeah. You think that's what he had? You think he had the symbol in the way you're talking about it of the cross?
Oh, without question. The cross was the most dominant symbol in King's understanding of the gospel and in his life. And the more difficult it became, and it did become difficult, the more difficult it became, more he knew he was going to be killed, the more he turned to the cross.
Now, you got to appreciate the fact that my audience includes a lot of people who understand the language, come out of the Christian faith, or in the Christian faith, but it also includes a lot of people for whom the cross makes no sense.
Yes,
the Roman Empire putting a man on the cross and killing him, and a
yes,
religion growing up out of a dead body.
Yes.
For all those people, how do you put it into a popular language that is beyond the dogma, beyond the creed, beyond the Christian story?
See, the cross is my story. It's the story of black people. That's the only way I can talk about it. See, when people ask me to tell my story, that's what I tell. Now, my story may not be your story. I've been all over the world, in India and in Sri Lanka and in Africa. I've been all over the place where people did not have that as their dominant symbol. But they wanted to hear my story. When I tell my story, that's what I tell. But then I want people to tell me their story. Right. What I do know is religion is always the search for meaning for people who are weak and powerless, and it connects me with people all over the world. That's why I want to hear these people's stories. I want to hear the stories because I know God is not without witness all over the world. And God speaks in many tongues, in many places. I know where God is present when I see little people, the least of these, affirming their humanity in situations where they have few resources to do that. That power is what I mean by the cross.
And you say the cross and the lynching tree interpret each other. Both were public spectacles, usually reserved for hardened criminals, rebellious slaves, rebels against the Roman state, and falsely accused militant blacks who were often called black beasts and monsters in human form. So how do the cross and the lynching tree interpret each other?
It keeps the lynchers from having the last word. The lynching tree interprets the cross. It keeps the cross out of the hands of those who are dominant. Nobody who is lynching anybody can understand the cross. That's why it's so important to place the cross and the lynching tree together, because the cross, the crucifixion, was analogous to a first century lynching. In fact, biblical scholars, when they want to describe what was happening to Jesus, many of them said it was a lynching. And all I want to suggest is, if American Christians say they want to identify with that cross, they have to see the cross as a lynching. Anytime your empathy, your solidarity is with the little people, you're with the cross. If you identify with the lynchers, then no, you can't understand what's happening. That in the sense of resistance, what resistance means for helpless people. Power in the powerless is not something that we are accustomed to listening to and understanding. It's not a part of our historical experience. America always wants to think it's going to win everything. Well, black people have a history in which we didn't win. We did not win. See, our resistance is a resistance against the odds. That's why we can understand the cross.
What are we to do about all of these recent events with the nooses? How should we respond?
It ought to encourage us to connect, blacks and whites. It ought to encourage us to remind us we don't have the community that we ought to have. And so instead of it, separating us from each other, it should bring us together. And generally speaking, there were whites in all of the marches. In Jena, at Columbia, there are always whites there. That's hope. That's a sign of hope.
What does it say to you? I mean, Jena's one thing because of the tradition and history of the South, but how do you explain the presence of these nooses, anonymously placed, in the New York area? Columbia, as you say, Long Island, where I lived for 25 years, not far from where we're sitting right now. How do you explain that phenomenon?
Racism and white supremacy was not confined to the South. It was all over America. It just expressed in different ways. So it's as deeply, in many ways, more deeply felt and present in the North or outside the South, largely because it was not acknowledged.
We just recently saw this book called Lynching in the West. It's photographs from Ken Gonzalez Day as he went searching for California's lynching trees. This is California.
Yes.
300 lynching trees he found out there. I mean, that's the far west. That's not the South.
Lynching happened all over, in Pennsylvania, in New York, in California, all over America lynching happened. Now, it was more prominent in the South, like Mississippi and Georgia. But and the terror was deeply embedded there. But it was a part of America. And that's why Malcolm X says Mississippi is America. It's not, it's not separate. And so, Malcolm X came from the North. And his voice was a lot more militant than King's, who came from the South. And so Malcolm was trying to get people to listen to something that they didn't want to listen to. Now, King knew his truth was obvious. Malcolm's truth was not so obvious.
The truth that?
Truth that white supremacy is as present in New York City as it is in Jackson, Mississippi. That's the truth. And when America can see itself as one, not just the South did the lynching, but it is a part of American culture, then we can figure out how we can start to overcome that. You can't overcome something if you never acknowledge its presence.
Do you acknowledge the presence of crucifixion and lynching today?
Yes, I do.
Where?
It's in the prison. It's in prisons. It's all over. Prisons, I would say, is the most prominent place.
How so? What do you mean by crucifixion and lynching?
Crucifixion and lynchings are symbols. They are symbols of the power of domination. They are symbols of the destruction of people's humanity. With black people being 12% of the U.S. population and nearly 50% of the prison population, that's lynching. It's a legal lynching. So there are a lot of ways to lynch a people than just hanging them on the tree. A lynching is trying to control the population. It is striking terror in the population so as to control it. That's what the ghetto does. It crams people into living spaces where they will self-destruct, kill each other, fight each other, shoot each other, because they have no place to breathe, no place for recreation, no place for an articulation and expression of their humanity. So it becomes a way, a metaphor for lynching. If lynching is understood as one group forcing a kind of inhumanity upon another group.
Do you believe God is love?
Yes, I believe God is love.
I would have a hard time believing God is love if I were a black man. I mean, those bodies swinging on the tree, where was God? Where was God during the 400 years of slavery?
See, you are looking at it from the perspective of those who win. You have to see it from the perspective of those who have no power. In fact, God is love because it's that power in your life that lets you know you can resist the definitions that other people are placing on you. And you sort of say, sure, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Sure, there is slavery. Sure, there is lynching, segregation. But glory, hallelujah. Now that glory, hallelujah, is the fact that there is a humanity and a spirit that nobody can kill. And as long as you know that, you will resist. That was the power of the civil rights movement. That was the power of those who kept marching even though the odds are against you. How do you keep going when you don't have the battle tanks, when you don't have the guns, when you don't have the military power, when you have nothing? How do you keep going? How do you know that you're a human being? You know because there's a power that transcends all of that.
So how does love fit into that? What do you mean when you say God is love?
God is that power that enables you to resist. You love that. You love the power that empowers you, even in a situation in which you have no political power, that you have to love God. Now, what is trouble is loving white people. Now, that's tough. It's not God we have trouble loving. Now, loving white people, now that's difficult. But King helped us on that. But that is an agonizing response.